At the family dinner, my sister said. There isn't involved anymore. My father mumbled. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Then they sent a stranger to escort me out of my own legacy. I stood up, looked around, and said, You declared me unnecessary. They had no clue the $900 million empire was mine, not theirs. The next morning, I locked every family account and watched them panic as the world they stole started to crumble. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. And tell me, have you ever been the one doing all the work while someone else took all the credit? To understand the explosion, you have to understand the bomb site. The Sterling Vineyard and Resort in Napa Valley wasn't just a venue. It was a glass fortress designed to make you feel small. It was hyper-modern, all sharp angles and floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the California sun and turned it into a weapon. I arrived 6 hours before the crash, driving my own car, parking in the overflow lot because the valet list didn't include my name. That was the first sign, but I ignored it. I told myself it was an oversight. I walked toward the entrance, the gravel crunching under my heels like grinding teeth. The dress code was wine country ethereal, which apparently meant every woman there was wearing pastels, soft pinks, creams, and pale blues. I was wearing black. Not the mourning kind, but the architectural kind. Sharp lines, high neck, structured shoulders. I looked like a smudge of ink on a blank page. I stood out, but not in the way a sister should. I moved through the atrium, keeping my head down, observing. That is the thing about being the invisible sibling, you learn to listen to the frequency others ignore. And what I heard made my blood run cold. It wasn't just that I was uninvited, it was why. I passed a cluster of board members near the Champagne Tower. Men I had hired. Men whose bonuses I had authorized from my private accounts. They didn't recognize me. Why would they? I was the ghost CEO. I did the work. Ashley took the photos. One of them, a man named Sterling, was swirling his glass. He leaned in close to his neighbor. It is a shame about the older sister, he said. His voice was low, practiced, the tone of someone discussing a terminal illness. But Ashley made the right call, keeping her away from the deal. You can't have that kind of instability at the signing table. I froze. Instability. I took a step closer, hiding behind a massive floral arrangement. Is it true she's in a facility? The other man asked. That is the rumor, Sterling replied. Ashley said she's been spiraling since the holidays, a complete breakdown. Sad, really. But the company needs a steady hand, and Ashley is the face of the brand for a reason. The air left my lungs. This was the Whisper campaign. My sister hadn't just stolen the credit for my work, she had systematically dismantled my reputation to justify the theft. She couldn't just say I wasn't involved, because the paperwork would show my fingerprints were everywhere. So she had to invent a reason why my fingerprints didn't matter. She told them I was crazy. She told them I was broken. She had painted me as a liability, so she could sell me off as scrap parts. I looked across the room and saw Ashley. She was holding court in a cream silk dress, laughing, touching her chest in mock humility as someone complimented her vision. She looked radiant. She looked like the perfect heiress. She looked like a predator who had already eaten and was just picking her teeth. I didn't storm over. I didn't throw a drink. I felt a cold, metallic calm settle over me. If they thought I was unstable, they had no idea what stability looked like. Stability is knowing exactly where the bodies are buried because you dug the graves yourself. I adjusted my jacket, lifted my chin, and walked toward the ballroom doors. The ballroom was a cavern of gold light and expensive acoustics, designed to make every whisper sound like a prophecy. I walked in, my heels sinking slightly into the plush carpet, moving toward the focal point of the room. A velvet-draped easel stood near the entrance, guarding the founder's plaque that was set to be unveiled later that evening. I didn't wait for the ceremony. I needed to see the lie in writing. I lifted the corner of the heavy blue velvet. The gold lettering gleamed under the chandeliers. Dedicated to the visionaries who built this legacy. Richard, Patricia, and Ashley Sterling, 3 names. The father who spent his days on the golf course. the mother who treated charity galas as a career, and the sister who couldn't read a balance sheet without a tutor. My name wasn't just small. It was absent. It was a vacuum where 8 years of my life should have been. I dropped the velvet, it settled back into place with a soft, heavy hush. I didn't feel the sting of tears, I felt the cold click of a lock engaging. I turned toward the head table. It was a long, white expanse set with crystal and silver, positioned on a riser so the family could look down on their guests. I counted the chairs. 1, 2, 3, 12. I did the math. My parents, Ashley, Brandon, the 6 board members, the foreign CEO, and his translator. 12 seats. There were 13 of us. I stood there, the 13th guest, the variable they hadn't factored into the equation. My father, Richard, looked up from his menu. He didn't look guilty, he didn't look ashamed, he looked annoyed. He looked at me the way you look at a waiter who has brought the wrong order and inconvenience to be managed, not a daughter to be welcomed. In that moment, the final piece of the puzzle snapped into place. For years, I had asked myself the wrong question. I had asked, how can they not know? How could they not know I paid off Brandon's $6,500,000 crypto debt? How could they not know I covered the mortgage on the vineyard every month for 5 years? How could they not know that the legacy investments funding their lifestyle were actually direct transfers from my personal holding company? The answer wasn't ignorance, it was survival. They didn't know because they couldn't afford to know. It is a psychological mechanism, a cognitive dissonance so thick it becomes armor. If my father acknowledged that I was the one keeping the lights on, he would have to admit that he was a failure who had squandered his inheritance. If my mother admitted I was the architect, she would have to admit she was just a tenant in a house she pretended to own. They had to erase me. My existence was evidence of their mediocrity. To see me was to shatter the delusion they had built their entire identities around. They weren't blind. They were protecting their egos from the blinding light of the truth. I wasn't just a daughter they didn't like. I was a reality they couldn't survive. I looked at the empty space where my chair should have been. It wasn't an oversight. It was a boundary line. They had built a fortress of lies, and they had left me outside the walls. That was fine. I didn't want to come in. I wanted to burn the fortress down. Richard tapped his knife against his champagne flute. The sound was sharp, a crystalline chime that cut through the murmur of the room like a command. Silence rippled outward from the head table, until the only sound was the hum of the climate control, keeping the air perfectly, artificially cool. "Friends, partners," Richard began, his voice booming with the practiced gravitas of a man who believed his own press release. He placed a hand on Ashley's shoulder. She looked up at him, eyes shimmering with tears that she had doubtless practiced in the mirror that morning. "When we started this journey 40 years ago, I dreamed of building something that would outlast me, but a dream is just a vapor until someone gives it form." He paused for effect. I stood in the shadows near the kitchen swing doors, watching the performance. It was my daughter, Ashley, who took that vapor and turned it into steel and glass, he lied. She is the one who saw the potential in eco-luxury, when the rest of the market was looking the other way. She built this empire from scratch, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. The room broke into applause. Ashley dabbed her eyes with a linen napkin, looking every inch the humble visionary. It was nauseating. It was also legally actionable fraud, but I let them have their moment. "And today," Richard continued, his voice swelling, "we are thrilled to announce that Viridian Group is merging with the Sato conglomerate in a deal valued at $1.8 billion. The number hung in the air, 1.8 billion. It was enough money to buy countries. It was enough money to bury the truth forever. The foreign investors nodded solemnly, raising their glasses. They thought they were buying a legacy. They didn't know they were buying a hollow shell. Richard raised his glass high. "To Ashley, the architect of our future. To Ashley," the room echoed. I didn't drink. I didn't move. I just stared at my father. And then, he felt it. The weight of my gaze. He looked past the adoring crowd, past the investors, and locked eyes with me in the back of the room. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. I saw the annoyance flare in his eyes, I was the stain on the tablecloth. I was the loose thread that could unravel the suit. He didn't want a scene, but my mere existence was a scene. He gave a subtle, sharp nod toward the side of the room. I followed his gaze. Christopher, the head of security, was standing by the emergency exit. Christopher was 6'4", built like a linebacker, and had been on the family payroll for a decade, or so they thought. Richard signaled him. A quick flick of the fingers. Remove her. It was the ultimate dismissal. He wasn't even going to speak to me. He was going to have the help drag me out like trash. Christopher stepped away from the wall. The room went quiet again, sensing the tension. People turned in their seats, following the path of the imposing security chief. Ashley looked over, a smirk touching the corner of her mouth. This was the cherry on top of her victory Sunday, watching me be physically ejected from her coronation. Christopher walked across the ballroom floor. His footsteps were heavy, deliberate. The crowd parted for him. He moved straight toward me, his face impassive, a wall of muscle and duty. My mother, Patricia, took a sip of her wine, looking away, refusing to witness the ugliness she had authorized. Christopher stopped 2 feet in front of me. He towered over me. The room held its breath, waiting for the grab, the struggle, the humiliation. Then, Christopher did something that made the air leave the room. He bowed. It wasn't a mocking bow. It was a gesture of deep, professional deference. He reached into his jacket pocket, not for handcuffs, but for a sleek, black tablet. He held it out to me with both hands. "We are ready for the transfer, ma'am," he said. His voice was deep, clear, and loud enough to carry to the head table. "The system is primed on your command." The silence that followed wasn't polite. It was confused. It was the sound of a narrative snapping in half. I saw the smirk slide off Ashley's face like wet clay. Richard stood up halfway, his mouth opening, but no sound coming out. They looked at Christopher, their loyal dog, and realized for the first time that he wasn't looking at them. He had never been looking at them. "Thank you, Christopher," I said, my voice steady. I took the tablet. It was heavy, cool to the touch. The screen glowed with a single, red button. The Trojan horse had opened the gates. Now it was time to burn the city. I took the tablet. It felt light in my hands, absurdly light, for something that held the weight of a nuclear option. On the screen, a single interface pulsed with a prompt. Viridian Protocol, lock. I didn't look at my father. I didn't look at my sister. I looked at the digital button that represented 8 years of my life, the nights I slept in server rooms, the weekends I spent auditing supply chains while they were brunching in Paris, the silent, invisible labor that built the stage they were currently standing on. I didn't hesitate. I didn't tremble. I simply tapped the glass. The reaction was immediate and physical. A low hum vibrated through the floorboards as the building's automated systems responded to the master command. The floor-to-ceiling smart glass windows, which moments ago had offered a panoramic view of the sun-drenched vineyard, hissed. In less than 2 seconds, the electrochromic tint engaged at maximum density, the view vanished. The golden light was choked off, replaced by a flat, opaque frost. The room went from an open-air palace to a white, windowless box. The digital audio feed to the speakers cut out with a sharp pop, silencing the ambient jazz. The sudden quiet was violent. Then, the screens behind the head table flickered. The slide showing the merger valuation $1.8 billion glitched and dissolved. The screen went black for a heartbeat before re-illuminating with a single, unadorned logo. R. Sterling Holdings. Below it, in red text. Asset lock. Active. "Just a technical glitch," Ashley shouted, her voice shrill, bouncing off the hard surfaces of the now claustrophobic room. She laughed, a brittle sound that cracked in the middle. "We're upgrading the system. It's a security feature. Christopher, fix it." Christopher didn't move. He stood next to me, hands clasped behind his back, watching the chaos with the indifference of a statue. Richard tried to take control, his instincts as a showman kicking in. He grabbed a waiter, passing with a card terminal. "Don't worry, everyone. The view is just resetting. Drinks are on the house. In fact, put a bottle of the 96 on every table. Put it on my black card." He swiped the card. The machine beeped. A long, flat, rejection tone. The waiter looked at the device, then, at my father. "I'm sorry, sir. It says, card not authorized." "Do you have another form of payment?" Richard's face went crimson. "Try it again. It's a Centurion card. It doesn't decline." "It does when the account owner revokes authorized user status," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the dead silence of the room, it carried to every corner. Then the sound started. It began as a single buzz, then a chorus. Phones lighting up on the head table. Patricia's purse vibrated against the crystal glassware. She pulled out her phone, frowning at the screen. "My mortgage payment," she whispered, staring at the notification. "It says, returned? Insufficient funds?" Brandon pulled out his phone. "My trading account just locked me out." "What is going on?" The board members, the men who had spent the last hour whispering that I was unstable, that I was a liability, looked from the frozen screens to the opaque windows, and finally, to me. They saw the tablet in my hand. They saw the calm in my posture. And the realization hit them like a physical blow. The whisper campaign evaporated. You don't hand the kill switch to the unstable sister. You don't give the keys to the castle, to the estranged daughter, unless she owns the castle. Ashley looked at me, her eyes wide, the panic finally breaking through her Botox. "What did you do?" she hissed. "Unlock it. You're ruining the presentation." "I didn't ruin anything," I said, tapping the screen one last time to confirm the transfer of the IP rights to my private server. "I just turned off the lights in a house you don't own." I stepped out of the shadows and into the center of the room. The emergency lighting cast long, harsh shadows against the frosted glass, turning the ballroom into an interrogation chamber. Mr. Sato, the CEO of the foreign conglomerate, was standing by the head table, his face a mask of confusion. He looked at the black screens displaying my holding company's logo, then at my father, and finally at me. "I apologize for the theatricality," I said, my voice cutting through the panic. "But I thought it was important you see exactly what you are buying before the wire transfer clears." "Who is this?" Sato asked his translator, gesturing at me. "I am the owner of the assets you just agreed to purchase," I replied before the translator could speak. "Or rather, the assets you thought you were purchasing." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "She is lying. She is mentally unwell." "Security." He looked around for Christopher, but Christopher was standing behind me, arms crossed, a silent sentinel of my authority. I walked toward the head table. I didn't rush. I moved with the inevitability of a foreclosure notice. "You can check the deed registry," I told Sato. "You can check the intellectual property filings for the Viridian operational software. You can check the title on every single vineyard, resort, and private island in the portfolio." I stopped directly in front of Ashley. She was trembling, her knuckles white as she gripped the tablecloth. "My family is selling you a brand," I continued, addressing the room but looking at my sister. "They are selling you a name, a logo, and a marketing strategy. But the land? The buildings? The proprietary code that runs the logistics? Those belong to R. Sterling Holdings. And R. Sterling Holdings is not for sale." A gasp went through the remaining board members. They were scrambling on their phones, pulling up the due diligence reports, frantically searching for the ownership clauses they had glossed over because Ashley had assured them it was all in the family trust. It wasn't just a failed merger, it was fraud. "You attempted to sell a company that consists entirely of leased assets," I said to my father. "Assets leased from me. And as of 5 minutes ago, when I executed the kill switch, those leases have been terminated for violation of contract." "Violation?" Richard sputtered. "What violation?" "Unauthorized transfer of ownership," I said. "You tried to sell my property without my permission. In the legal world, we call that selling stolen goods." "Mr. Sato turned to his team. He spoke rapidly in Japanese. I didn't need a translator to understand the tone. It was the tone of a man realizing he had almost walked into a burning building. He looked at Richard with pure disdain. "You said you owned the infrastructure." "We do," Richard insisted, sweat beading on his forehead. It's a technicality, a family structuring issue. We can fix it. It is not a technicality, Sato said, his English crisp and cold. It is a crime, he signaled to his team. They didn't even pack up their papers. They just stood up and walked out. The board members followed them, heads down, avoiding eye contact, fleeing the blast radius of the investigation they knew was coming. The room emptied until it was just us, the family, and the ghost they had tried to exorcise. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was hollow. It was the sound of a vacuum where a legacy used to be. Then the cannibalization began. You told me it was handled, Richard screamed, turning on Ashley. You told me the trust documents were watertight. You said she was out. I thought she was. Ashley shrieked back, her mascara running in jagged lines down her face. You're the one who spent the operating capital on the jet. You're the one who needed the merger to cover the debts. Stop it, Patricia wailed, clutching her pearls like they were life preservers. Everyone can hear you. What will people think? They were eating each other alive. The facade of the perfect, united dynasty crumbled the moment the money vanished. They weren't a family. They were a corporation of parasites. And I had just cut off the blood supply. I watched them for a moment, feeling a strange, clinical detachment. I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel love. I felt like a surgeon who had successfully removed a tumor. You're ruined, Richard whispered, staring at the empty doorway where the investors had left. He looked at me, his eyes full of hate. You burned it all down. Are you happy? We have nothing. You have exactly what you built, I said, nothing. The fallout wasn't an explosion, it was a slow, suffocating erosion. The headlines didn't scream, they stated facts, which was worse. Viridian Group restructures amidst asset dispute. Fraud investigation launched in Napa Valley real estate deal. The fortress I had built for them didn't just crumble, it was repossessed. The Sterling Vineyard and Resort went to auction 3 months later. My father tried to spin it as a strategic downsizing, but the market knew better. You don't sell a legacy property for pennies on the dollar unless the wolves are at the door. My parents moved into a 2-bedroom condo in a development they used to mock. Patricia had to sell her jewelry to cover the legal retainers. Richard spends his days on the golf course of a public club, telling anyone who will listen that he was the victim of a corporate coup, not his own greed. Ashley went dark. Her Instagram, once a shrine to her curated perfection, was scrubbed clean. No more photos of the view she didn't own. No more captions about building an empire. She learned the hard way that influence is a currency that crashes the moment the credit card gets declined. And Brandon? Without my secret bailouts, the bookies weren't interested in payment plans. He is learning a very hard, very physical lesson about consequences. I didn't watch it happen. I read the summaries in the monthly reports Christopher sends me. I don't feel pity. I don't feel triumph. I feel the cool, clean sensation of a balance sheet that finally zeroes out. I stood on the balcony of my new home. It isn't a glass fortress. It is a mid-century modern house in the hills, smaller, quieter, and entirely mine. The deed has one name on it. The mortgage is paid. The foundation is solid, because I poured the concrete myself. People always tell you not to burn bridges. They say it with a kind of pious fear, as if destroying a connection is an act of violence. But standing there, watching the fog roll over the hills, I realize they are wrong. Burning a bridge isn't an act of war, it is an act of strategy. You don't burn the bridge to kill the enemy, you burn it to stop them from following you. You burn it to ensure that when you rebuild, you aren't carrying the same parasites across the chasm. For years, I thought peace was something I had to buy. I thought if I paid enough debts, solved enough problems, and stayed quiet enough, I could purchase my safety. But you cannot buy peace from people who profit from your chaos. Cutting them off wasn't punishment, it was the only way to save the host from the infection. The silence from my phone isn't lonely, it is the sound of my life finally belonging to me. I took a sip of my coffee. The air was crisp. The future was unwritten. And for the first time, I held the pen. If you were the architect of your own destruction, would you have the courage to rebuild it alone? Or would you stay in the burning house just to keep them warm?